The morning sky over Denver was a pale watercolor of soft blues and silver clouds, the kind of sky that made travelers feel hopeful. Inside Gate 32, people shuffled between coffee cups, boarding passes, and sleepy smiles. The loudspeaker called for passengers of Flight 762, bound for Washington, D.C. Among them was Lieutenant Ava Brooks, though no one recognized her by that title anymore. Her olive jacket covered a simple nurse's uniform, the badge clipped neatly to her pocket. Ava Brooks, RN. She moved quietly, the kind of person you might notice only after she was gone, calm eyes, strong posture, and a stillness that came from years of discipline. She hadn't been in a cockpit for almost 3 years. The Air Force chapter of her life ended with a folded flag, an honorable discharge, and a scar across her shoulder that still ached on cold mornings. Today, she wasn't a pilot, just another passenger trying to reach home. The flight attendants greeted her with practiced smiles as she stepped into the cabin. Ava nodded politely, making her way to seat 17A, a window seat overlooking the wing. She placed her small duffel under the seat, fastened her belt, and exhaled deeply as the engines began their soft roar. Around her, the plane buzzed with life, a child asking his mother why clouds looked like cotton, a businessman tapping away on his laptop, a young couple whispering excitedly about their honeymoon. Normal sounds, ordinary peace. The pilot's voice came through the intercom, smooth, professional. Greater than, "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. We're expecting a calm flight today. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride." The aircraft taxied down the runway, accelerating until the world outside blurred into streaks of gray and green. Ava watched the ground fall away, a feeling she knew too well, the moment where control passes from earth to sky. For the first 30 minutes, everything was routine. The flight attendants rolled carts down the aisles, serving coffee and small pretzels. Ava smiled faintly as the child near her window pointed to the clouds, pretending they were mountains of whipped cream. She allowed herself a moment of warmth, of forgetting. Then, it happened. At first, it was subtle. A soft, almost imperceptible shudder. A low vibration beneath her feet. Ava's pilot instincts, buried but not dead, felt it before her mind did. Something in the tone of the engines changed. The soft hum grew uneven. One side seemed louder, strained, as if struggling to breathe. Then came the sound no pilot, or passenger, ever wants to hear. A metallic pop, a deep, hollow bang. The cabin jolted violently. Coffee cups spilled, a laptop crashed to the floor, and oxygen masks jerked loose before retracting again. The entire plane tilted sharply to the left. Screams cut through the air. A baby began wailing. Overhead bins popped open, scattering luggage into the aisle. The captain's calm voice returned, but this time, it was trembling. Greater than, "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated, we're experiencing some mechanical difficulty." The intercom died mid-sentence. The lights flickered. Alarms blared faintly from behind the cockpit door, high-pitched, rhythmic, unmistakable to someone who had once sat in that very seat. Ava froze for half a heartbeat. Then her training took over. She unbuckled her seatbelt. "Ma'am, please sit down." A flight attendant shouted from the aisle, her voice shaking. But Ava's tone was steady, commanding. "Greater than, I'm a former Air Force pilot. What's happening in the cockpit?" The attendant hesitated, glancing at the chaos. The plane was still losing altitude, shuddering like a wounded bird. The captain's not responding, she stammered. He collapsed right after the bang. Ava's heart sank. She grabbed the armrest for balance, her mind racing through possibilities: engine fire, compressor stall, hydraulic failure. "How's the first officer?" she demanded, still trying to regain control, but he's yelling something about a total engine shutdown. Ava didn't think twice. Greater than, "Get me to the cockpit." Passengers turned as she moved quickly up the aisle, steadying herself against seats while the cabin pitched and rattled. Some cried out for help, others clutched hands, whispering prayers. A man tried to grab her arm. "Miss, sit down. You'll get hurt," but she brushed past him with laser focus. The cockpit door opened after a tense knock and brief exchange. Inside, smoke hung in the air like gray ghosts. The first officer was pale, sweat pouring down his face as his hands gripped the controls. The captain lay slumped against the side, unconscious, oxygen mask hanging uselessly. Ava's voice cut through the chaos. "Greater than, I'm Lieutenant Ava Brooks, United States Air Force, let me take right seat." The co-pilot stared, wide-eyed. You're What? No time, she said sharply. Give me flight status. He rattled off numbers between gasps. Engine 2 failure, possible fire, loss of thrust on both sides, hydraulics intermittent. Ava slid into the seat, her fingers moving over the familiar layout. The control stick felt both foreign and home all at once. The alarms screamed in her ears. Greater than, okay, she murmured, mostly to herself. We're not dying today. Her hands steadied on the yoke as she assessed the instruments. The plane was losing altitude fast, 20,000 feet and dropping. She flipped switches, silenced unnecessary warnings, and tried to relight the starboard engine. Nothing. Crossfeed fuel from left tank, she ordered. The co-pilot obeyed, trembling. Outside the window, the sky tilted dangerously, the wing dipping toward the ground far below, a patchwork of green and brown. Come on, she whispered. Stay with me. The aircraft responded sluggishly, but enough to level slightly. Ava fought the trembling in her arms, adjusting flaps manually. Sweat dripped from her forehead. The cabin speaker crackled to life behind her. This is the flight attendant, a terrified voice said. Passengers are panicking. What do I tell them? Ava's reply was calm, steady, powerful. Greater than, tell them, help is in control. The next minutes blurred into a battle of instinct and willpower. The co-pilot followed her lead like a soldier taking orders. The left engine sputtered, caught fire, and then, miraculously, reignited after she rerouted the fuel pressure. Ava exhaled sharply, relief flooding through her chest. That's it, baby, she murmured, hands firm on the controls. The aircraft steadied at 12,000 feet. The pressure normalized, though smoke still lingered. Ava radioed the tower, her voice even but clipped. Greater than, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is Flight 762. Dual engine failure, partial recovery, captain unconscious. I am assuming command, call sign Angel 17A. There was a stunned silence on the frequency. Then, a male voice replied, Angel 17A, say again. Is this, Lieutenant Brooks? She allowed herself a faint smile. Not anymore, she said. Today, I'm your nurse on duty. But I've got 185 lives depending on this landing. The runway came into view minutes later, a thin gray strip surrounded by emergency vehicles. Ava guided the plane with a precision that came only from muscle memory and prayer. The landing gear extended with a groan. Flaps to 30, she commanded. The co-pilot obeyed. The aircraft shook violently as it touched down, rubber screaming against asphalt. Ava kept her hands firm on the throttle, heart pounding. The plane bounced. Once, twice, then steadied. The engines coughed, smoke trailed, but the jet slowed to a crawl before coming to a stop at the end of the runway. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, applause, cheers, sobs. Inside the cabin, strangers held each other, crying out of disbelief and gratitude. Flight attendants hugged. Children pointed to the window where sunlight broke through the clouds. Ava sat back in her seat, breathing heavily, staring at the horizon. Her hands trembled now, not from fear, but from release. The co-pilot turned to her, still in shock. You just saved all of us. Ava smiled faintly, eyes glistening. Greater than, no, she said softly. The sky just gave me one more chance to make it right. Outside, paramedics rushed to help the captain. Inside, 185 passengers lived, because one woman in seat 17A remembered who she used to be. And somewhere, high above the runway, the clouds parted, as if saluting the return of an old angel to the sky. For a few seconds after touchdown, the cabin was silent. Not because there was nothing to say, but because no one could believe what had just happened. The wheels screeched against the runway, the aircraft trembled like a living thing, and then, stillness. A moment later came the first sound. A child's cry, not of fear, but of life. Then a gasp, then a sob, and then, like a wave breaking through a dam, the cabin erupted into cheers. Hands clapped, strangers hugged, tears streamed freely. Lieutenant Ava Brooks, seat 17A, the nurse who became a pilot again, sat frozen for a moment, staring at the trembling yoke in her hands. Her arms burned, her chest heaved, but her focus remained fixed on the runway stretching ahead. She whispered under her breath. Greater than, we're home. The silence after the storm. The first officer, a young man named Daniel Reyes, leaned back in disbelief, his voice barely audible. Greater than, you just saved a whole plane. Ava turned to him with a weary smile. Greater than, we saved them. Both of us. The emergency lights flickered above them as ground crews raced toward the aircraft. Through the cockpit windows, Ava could see fire trucks and ambulances surrounding them like guardians. Tower confirms emergency crews on standby, Daniel said, his voice steadier now. They're ready for evacuation. Ava nodded, unbuckled her harness, and turned toward the cabin door. Her legs trembled as she stood, 3 years since her last landing, and her body reminded her of every hour she'd been away. She looked once more at the unconscious captain, now being tended to by medics. He's breathing, one of them said. Relief washed over her face. Greater than, good, she whispered. He still has skies left to fly. The cabin erupts. When Ava stepped out of the cockpit, 185 pairs of eyes turned toward her. The flight attendant stopped mid-motion, one hand covering her mouth as tears welled up. Ma'am, are you the one who? Ava raised a tired hand. Let's get everyone off safely first. Her voice, though calm, carried authority, the kind that silences chaos. Within minutes, the passengers began to disembark, moving down emergency slides and portable stairs. Paramedics rushed in, checking for injuries. The smell of burnt rubber and smoke filled the cool morning air, mixing with the sounds of relief, crying, laughter, whispered prayers. An older man, still trembling, approached her near the exit. Greater than, you saved my daughter's life, he said, voice breaking. How can I ever thank you? Ava shook her head softly. You already did, she said, by holding her hand the whole time. As he turned away, she caught sight of the little girl he'd been holding, the same child who had cried in joy after the landing. The girl smiled shyly at Ava and whispered, "You're a superhero." Ava's lips quivered, her throat tightening. She knelt slightly and replied, "Greater than, no, sweetheart. I'm just someone who remembered what to do." The investigation team. Hours later, the aircraft sat motionless at the far end of the runway, cordoned off with bright yellow tape. Investigators in blue jackets circled it, taking photos, talking in hushed voices. Ava sat on the back of an ambulance, a gray blanket draped over her shoulders. Her fingers were still stained with soot and hydraulic fluid. Her hair clung to her face, damp with sweat. A man approached, crisp uniform, polished shoes, eyes sharp as steel. He introduced himself as Colonel James Hartley, head of Air Safety Command. "Greater than, Lieutenant Brooks," he said formally, though she hadn't used that title in years. "I've read your service record. F-15 pilot, honorably discharged, Bronze Star recipient. You've had one hell of a morning." Ava smiled faintly. "You could say that." Hartley's tone softened. "The co-pilot said you took full command when the captain lost consciousness. You overrode a dual-engine shutdown and performed a dead-stick landing on partial hydraulics." "That's impossible." "Greater than, not impossible," she replied quietly. "Just hard." Hartley chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. "You're lucky to be alive, Lieutenant." Ava looked toward the crowd of passengers being reunited with their families. "Not luck," she said. "Grace. The news breaks. By noon, the world knew. Nurse saves 185 lives after pilot collapse. Former fighter pilot takes control of passenger jet. Miracle landing at Dulles Airport. Reporters gathered outside the terminal, cameras flashing as passengers described the moment the plane shook, the chaos, the calm woman who suddenly walked into the cockpit and turned panic into prayer. Ava tried to slip quietly out of the crowd, still wearing her nurse's ID. But someone recognized her. Then another. Then everyone. Applause followed her down the corridor, spontaneous, thunderous, endless. Children waved. Strangers cried. One flight attendant hugged her tightly and whispered, "You brought us back, ma'am. You brought us all back." Ava's eyes glistened, her voice soft but steady. "Greater than, we were all meant to land today." Flashbacks in the quiet. That night, the hospital where Ava worked insisted she stay for observation. Her vitals were stable, but the doctors knew trauma could hide beneath calm. She lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing the faint echo of engines and alarms in her mind. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw clouds spinning, felt the yoke trembling in her hands, heard the whispers of passengers behind the cockpit door. In the stillness, memories returned, her last mission in the Air Force, the one that ended her flying career. A mechanical failure, a split-second decision, an ejection seat that saved her but not her wingman. That day had broken her heart, and grounded her forever. But today, the sky gave her something back. She turned to the window, where moonlight washed the room in silver. Greater than, maybe I was never meant to stop flying, she whispered. Just meant to fly when it mattered. The call from command. The next morning, as she prepared to leave the hospital, her phone rang. Unknown number. Greater than, Lieutenant Brooks. Speaking. This is Colonel Adams, Command Air Operations. We just wanted to say, the Air Force never forgets its own. You saved 185 souls yesterday. The Secretary of Defense has requested to meet you. Ava froze, stunned. Sir, I'm not in uniform anymore. Greater than, doesn't matter, Adams replied. Courage doesn't retire. For the first time since the incident, Ava laughed softly, not out of pride, but disbelief. Understood, sir. When she hung up, she looked down at her nurse badge and then at her old dog tag she still carried in her bag, the one engraved with, Ava Brooks, Angel 17A. The same call sign that once echoed across radio waves in combat. The same seat number she had taken on Flight 762. Coincidence, or fate, she didn't know, but it made her heart tighten. The ceremony. 2 days later, the passengers gathered again, this time, at a hangar outside Dulles Airport. The damaged plane sat behind them, now quiet, gleaming under the afternoon sun. A podium stood in front, surrounded by press cameras and American flags. Colonel Hartley took the stage and spoke of bravery, skill, and grace under pressure. Then he called her name. Greater than, Lieutenant Ava Brooks, the woman who turned fear into faith, and turbulence into triumph. The applause was deafening. Ava stepped forward, her nurse's uniform neatly pressed, her expression humble, yet firm. Hartley presented her with a medal of civilian valor. Greater than, you didn't just land a plane, he said. You reminded us all what true service means. Ava accepted it silently, her eyes glistening as she looked at the rows of faces, mothers, children, elderly couples, every soul who had been aboard that flight. The words that stayed. After the ceremony, reporters swarmed her, but Ava avoided the spotlight. Instead, she stood near the hangar doors, watching the sky, wide, endless, forgiving. Daniel, the co-pilot, walked up beside her. You know, he said, when I heard your call sign on the radio, I thought I was hallucinating. Angel 17A, that's what they called you, right? Ava smiled faintly. Long time ago. Daniel nodded. It fits. You really were an angel up there. Ava looked out toward the horizon, the wind tugging gently at her hair. I wasn't the only one, she said. There were 185 angels with me. I just happened to be holding the controls. They stood in silence for a long while, watching a distant jet climb into the clouds, wings flashing in the sunlight, as if tipping in salute. Ava whispered under her breath. Greater than, fly safe up there. And somewhere deep inside, she felt the sky answer, not with words, but with peak. 3 weeks had passed since the day Lieutenant Ava Brooks became a household name. The story had traveled across continents, from newsrooms to living rooms, from flight schools to nursing wards. Everywhere she went, people wanted to shake her hand, take her picture, thank her for what she'd done. But fame was never what Ava wanted. She didn't see herself as a hero. She saw herself as someone who had simply done her duty. Yet that morning, as she walked down the quiet runway of Andrews Air Base, she couldn't help but feel the weight of what had happened. Not the fame, not the medals, but the memory of those voices in the cabin, the fear, the silence, the moment the engines finally obeyed. Her footsteps echoed across the tarmac. The wind carried the faint hum of distant jets. She had been invited by the Air Force to attend an air show, as an honored guest, the letter had said. When she arrived, the officers saluted her. Young cadets whispered to each other, eyes wide with admiration. Greater than, that's her, the nurse pilot. The one they called Angel 17A. Ava smiled politely, nodded to each of them, and tried to ignore the uneasy ache in her chest, the same ache that came every time she remembered her last mission, her lost wingman, and the promise she made never to fly again. But the sky had a strange way of calling back its own. The sky calls her name. The airshow began with thunder, 2 F-22 Raptors slicing across the horizon in perfect formation, sunlight glinting off their steel-gray bodies. Their engines roared through the crowd like rolling thunder. Ava watched from the VIP section, her heart tightening. Those were her birds once, the machines she trained on, trusted with her life. Every roar felt like an echo of who she used to be. Next to her, Colonel Hartley leaned close. Greater than, we wanted you to see this, he said softly. They've got something special planned. She frowned slightly. For the crowd, he smiled. For you. The announcer's voice came over the loudspeakers. Greater than, ladies and gentlemen, today we honor one of our own. A woman whose courage reminded the world that the call of the sky never fades. Former Air Force lieutenant, now registered nurse, the hero of Flight 762, Ava Brooks. The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. Ava froze, her eyes on the sky. The F-22s climbed higher, curving gracefully into the sunlight until they were just two silver glints. Then their radios crackled over the base speakers, a deep, resonant voice filling the air. Greater than, Angel 17A, this is Raptor Flight Command. Do you copy? Ava's breath caught in her throat. The crowd fell silent. Her old call sign, spoken in the open sky. She whispered, barely audible, copy, Raptor Command. The announcer smiled. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing is something rare, an in-flight salute reserved only for the bravest among us. The two jets reappeared, streaking low across the runway in tight formation. Their wings tilted slightly, the ancient gesture of honor between aviators. Then, through the loudspeakers, the pilot's voice came again, this time soft, reverent. Greater than, welcome back, Angel 17A. The sky remembers you. The tears of the sky. Ava couldn't stop the tears that filled her eyes. She stood there, motionless, one hand pressed to her chest as the F-22s thundered past overhead, trailing white ribbons of vapor through the blue. The sound wasn't noise anymore, it was music. It was memory. Each roar felt like the heartbeat of a world she thought she had left behind. People around her cheered, some saluted, others cried. But for Ava, everything went quiet inside. In her mind, she was back in that cockpit, the alarms blaring, the smell of smoke, the trembling controls. And through it all, she could hear the voices of the passengers she'd saved. A little girl saying, "You're a superhero." A father whispering, "Thank you." A co-pilot murmuring, "You just saved us all." The jets passed once more, slower this time. Their wings tipped again, shimmering in the light, one final salute. Greater than, for the nurse who flew through fire, came the radio call. For the soldier who never forgot the sky. The crowd roared. Ava smiled through her tears. A quiet reunion. After the show, Ava wandered away from the noise, walking toward the far end of the base where the hangars cast long shadows across the pavement. She needed a moment alone, just her and the wind. That's when she heard a familiar voice. Greater than, permission to join you, Lieutenant. She turned. It was Captain Daniel Reyes, the same co-pilot from Flight 762. He wore a crisp Air Force uniform now. He had been reinstated temporarily for commendation. Ava smiled warmly. "I told you not to call me Lieutenant." Daniel grinned. "And I told you I'd never forget who you were up there." They walked together in silence for a while, watching the last rays of sunset reflect off the hangar doors. Greater than, do you miss it? Daniel asked. Flying, I mean. Ava's eyes softened. Every day, but maybe I was meant to touch the sky just long enough to remember what it felt like, and to remind others what courage looks like. Daniel nodded slowly. Those pilots today, they weren't just honoring a flight. They were honoring what you stood for. She looked up at the horizon where the F-22s had vanished into the gold-streaked clouds. Greater than, the sky never really lets go, she said quietly. It just waits for you to look up again. The final letter. A week later, Ava received a letter in the mail. No return address, only the emblem of the U.S. Air Force stamped in blue. Inside was a simple card. Greater than to Angel 17A. Your flight may have ended, but your wings never will. From those who still fly with you, every day, above the clouds. Tucked behind the note was a small silver pin, the kind worn only by active pilots. But this one was different. At its center was engraved a single number, 185. She held it in her palm, feeling its weight, the lives, the gratitude, the memories. For the first time since that terrifying day, she let herself cry, not out of fear or pain, but out of peace. Epilogue. The sky remembers. Months later, Ava returned to work at the hospital. Life slowly found its rhythm again, patience, shifts, quiet smiles. But every time she heard the distant roar of an airplane, she would pause and look up. Sometimes she thought she saw something, two faint dots moving in formation, wings glinting in the light. Maybe it was imagination. Maybe it was a reminder. One evening, as she stepped out of the hospital, a young nurse approached her. "Greater than, Ms. Brooks," she said shyly, "is it true you used to fly fighter jets?" Ava smiled. "Once upon a time." The nurse grinned. "I want to fly one day too." Ava placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Greater than, then never stop looking up," she said softly. "That's where dreams live, and where heroes find their way home." The girl nodded, eyes shining. Ava turned toward the horizon, the last light of day spilling across the clouds like fire. And somewhere above, two jets crossed paths, their contrails forming a shining A in the sky. Ava laughed softly, whispering to the wind, "Greater than, I see you, boys." Message received. The wind carried her words upward, toward the endless blue. Because some stories don't end. They just keep flying.